dear colleagues and friends here in this space at the IFA Gallery Berlin and behind the screens. Welcome to the book launch of the new Zeitbild, Untitled Colonial Fragments in School Context. Thank you so much for being here with us for this special moment.
Auf Deutsch ist der Titel des Bandes Untie, Koloniale Fragmente im Kontext Schule. Es wird im Nachgang zu dieser Veranstaltung eine auf Deutsch untertitelte Version geben. Wir werden heute aber die Diskussion aus technischen und zeitlichen Gründen ausschließlich auf Englisch führen. Das Buch ist zweimal erschienen, einmal auf Deutsch und Englisch und einmal auf Deutsch und Französisch. Es gibt also zwei Ausgaben, um auch ein internationales Publikum zu erreichen. Das Buch ist das Ergebnis einer Kooperation zwischen der Bundeszentrale für politische Bildung und der IFA Galerie Berlin des Instituts für Auslandsbeziehungen.
To complement the print version of the book, there will be also a digital flip book to make it more accessible for everyone, and it's going to feature also additional content. And we have the freshly printed German version of the book in our hands. This is really exciting, I have to say. And there is also the German and French version. So it's a trilingual publication to also reach a wider international audience and also to show the complexities of this subject matter. Because the colonial project is a global project, actually. And we are also proudly presenting some of its content, and it's really a great honor for us that a few of the contributors of the book are here as our guests tonight behind the screens, and yeah, that's really beautiful. And at this point, we should not forget to mention our graphic artist, Robert Müller. Hello, Robert. Thank you so much for the great collaboration. Robert wrote two books into their wonderful aesthetic final form. Thank you again.
Now we are here at the IFA Gallery in Berlin, and we is at the moment 2 of 3 editors of this book, which is the result of a fruitful cooperation between the IFA Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations and the German Federal Agency for Civic Education, BBP. My name is Annika Niemann. I'm an art educator and education curator, and currently part of the Cultural Agents for Creative Schools in Berlin program. I hand over to Miriam, who is in the digital space with us tonight.
This cooperation of the book.
Miriam, and wir hören dich nicht gerade. Du musst es gleich noch mal wiederholen.
Okay. Maybe try now with the computer. Do you hear me now?
In the meantime,
I heard you.
Aisha Diallo.
But the others
I'm a
didn't.
cultural scientist, a cultural producer, educator, and I currently work for the new exhibition venue Das Minsk in Potsdam, where I'm in charge of education and outreach. And now I'm handing over back to Miriam so she can introduce herself.
Okay, I'll try again with the computer audio. So do you hear me now? Yes? And in Berlin as well? I'm Miriam Schabafrus. I'm a social scientist and a project manager at the Federal Agency for Civic Education. And I'm also a co-editor of this book. And I accompanied the whole process, which was a very excellent collaboration with the IFA Gallery and the 2 other editors. And unfortunately, I cannot be with you.
can't hear you, Miriam, in the IFA space. I think now the camera is on, but the audio seems to be off. Jetzt, now, sorry. Now we can hear you.
Yes, welcome, Miriam, and also welcome to our guests tonight. I'm going to introduce them, starting with Alia Septi, curator and co-director of the IFA Gallery Berlin, Juliana dos Santos, artist, educator, writer, and PhD candidate from Sao Paulo, Tiago de Paula Souza, social scientist, curator, art mediator, artist, writer, and also from Sao Paulo. Welcome. And Aram Siai, political scientist and professor at the University of Kassel here in Germany. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for being here with us in the digital space, but we connected, right? And yes.
On the whole, there are around 40 contributions, including texts and artworks in the book. It's quite heavy, in fact. And so we can only give a first insight into the content tonight. The authors and artists start from different local and international fields and areas of expertise. They examine how stereotypes and racist representations are reproduced and perpetuated within educational contexts. Also, they map the potential strategies for reinterpreting and transforming structures and materials within educational practices. One central format of the publication is the collaboration in tandems between artists and authors from educational and academic backgrounds. And the tandem is like a co-creative space where different ideas of knowledge productions interact and resonate with each other.
So if we talk about this book, the central topic is school, Untitled Colonial Fragments in School Context. And school is actually much more than textbooks and curriculum. In fact, school is a social system. And when we talk about social system, mechanism of inclusion and exclusion happen on a daily basis, actually, depending on the social group. And school, and when it comes to colonial continuities and racism, and there's this link between colonial continuities and structural racism, it has an impact on actually so many school children in the everyday, i.e. in the schoolyard, through countless classroom interactions, and that can be quite traumatic. And there's also a system of silencing where certain topics, certain even historical facts are not revealed, not spoken about, not taught. And that's really interesting to also analyze that, how this mechanism works. And in the book, we look into that actually. And there are 4 sections in the book, so it's split into 4 sections that feed each other. The first section introduces us to processes of unlearning. Unlearning means actually, in general, it means dismantling the dominant narrative in our post-colonial moment, but also it shows how we are somehow entangled in these colonial, neo-colonial structures, and especially the privileged ones, how they actually benefit from this system. And then comes the second section, second section deals with the idea of filling the void, the gaps. So what does it mean when certain voices, certain perspectives, certain stories are missing? What is also hurting, and how to repair those gaps, and also in a way create a sense of self-love and a sense of belonging.
Decolonization and resistance are the focus of the third section of the book. The contributions enable us to understand individual experience of collective events and historical accounts of resistance against colonial powers. The fourth section sees authors and artists undertake critical rereadings of textbooks. They seek to deconstruct colonial continuities and structural racism in textbooks and curricula. And they show alternative forms of representation.
Okay, now we would like to dive into some more aspects of the publication, and we now going to open the discussion with our guests tonight. So welcome again, and we're going to start off the conversation with Yes. Yes, it was a bit of a... oh. Yes. So Alia Septi, welcome. We're going to start the conversation with you. And it's a great pleasure to have you here with us because you are the mother of Untitled Chapter, the ongoing project Untitled Chapter. And yes, we would like to know what actually lies behind the title, Untie to Tie. since you mentioned the term of repair, um, how do you think, if it comes to talk about racism and colonial violence, how to do so through a reparative lens? So that means actually without recreating trauma, especially for Black, indigenous people of color. How do you talk about this topic without re-traumatizing, actually? So that's why I'm thinking about reparative practices. What do you think?
Then, but when he presented it, actually, he focused on these pieces of wood, how all the colors that were together, and then he said, but you know, at the end, it's all about love. It took me a lot of time to digest that.
It's interesting because Frantz Fanon also talks about, when he talks about coloniality and decolonial practices, he talks actually about love and specifically self-love. And you mentioned Pascal Martin Taillou, where okay, I'm back. So you mentioned Pascal Martin Taillou, the work he showed at the IFA Gallery in the framework of Untie, and you also, as I saw in one of the interviews you did, the concept of tout monde, all world, by philosopher Edouard Glissant. Can you talk about that? Why you refer to this concept of tout monde, all world? Okay, and my final question to you, Alia. If you talk about connection and interconnection, how do you see the links between artistic practices and education, actually? Why is it important to see those links and to work together?
I think it opens up the mind, the imagination, and it helps sometimes when we think about the education system, a lot of the first and sometimes prejudices, but also sometimes also reality is that it's quite it can be experienced as quite a stiff structure, and by bringing in different voices, by bringing in artistic proposition, it just opens it up and opens up the imagination and creates additional space for that, and just like makes more and more, takes more and more away this borders of sometimes quite strict structure. So it opens the imagination in a nutshell.
Okay, it opens the imagination. Thank you, Alia.
Thank you.
This gives us already the perfect link to the next couple we are discussing with Tiago de Paula Souza, who is in Rio right now, and with Juliana dos Santos, who is in Sao Paulo. Very welcome to you again. And as Juliana will follow the conversation basically in Portuguese, in Brazilian Portuguese, Tiago will help us with translating. So we have just a little bit more complex situation now in the talk. Thank you, Tiago, in advance, and thank you, Juliana, for being with us. Juliana dos Santos and Tiago de Paula Souza work together in the format of a tandem. And in your contribution, you highlight the colonial continuities in the absence of African, Afro-diasporic, and indigenous peoples and realities in Brazilian teaching materials and educational system. I start with a question to Juliana. You counter this absence with the power of imagination, a little bit like Alia pointed out in her last sentences. And you set the power of imagination as a conscious act. And I would like to invite you to share with us some thoughts on how you conceive imagination and how you see the role of imagination in the context of education.
Boa tarde a todos e todas, todes. Primeiramente, quero agradecer o convite por estar participando desse projeto. Bom, eu venho trabalhando, né, como professora, arte educadora e artista há um tempo considerável, e grande parte da minha consideração a respeito da imaginação, da importância da imaginação nos processos educacionais, eles vêm muito a partir desse contexto meu enquanto educadora e também como alguém que passou grande parte da vida em processos escolares, num sistema educacional brasileiro em que há um processo, né, de negação e visibilidade das histórias negras e indígenas no país, né? Então, eu acho que chegou um momento em que eu percebi que a imaginação ela é um ponto fundamental, inclusive, para a gente entender como foi a luta, né, de intelectuais, artistas negros ao longo dos séculos passados, que viram a educação como plataforma fundamental de mudança, né, para melhores condições de vida da população negra. Então, se, por exemplo, a Frente Negra Brasileira, uma entidade...
I think Tiago needs to translate by now, right?
Yeah, thank you, Juliana.
It will be difficult.
Tiago, eu estava esperando...
No,
você dizer.
No, thank you. My memory is not that, I don't know, fast. But let's see. First of all, Juliana said, thank you for the invitation. Thank you. And I also want to say thank you to IFA Gallery and to everybody who was working in the production of this book. It was like super interesting to share these ideas with you. So as Annika first mentioned, Juliana and I, we have been collaborating for the past years in Brazil and internationally. And when the invitation came, we realized it would be like a moment for us to kind of like wrap some of the ideas we have been discussing and putting into practice. Juliana started saying that she's a PhD student, she's a PhD candidate and also an artist. And what she tries to do in her practice is basically to connect the necessities or the demands that she found while researching material and while wondering what is this silence and what is this this absence, where like basically asking a question that she might ask for the rest of her life, like where are Black presence or where are Black and Indigenous presence in Brazilian art history and in Brazilian art education. This was kind of like the departure point of her research. And she extends this research to her practice as an artist. And then like her first gesture is to basically go back to the 20th century and around like I mean, Brazil in the 30s, basically there was like a strong movement of Black intellectuals who like now we call, like they used to call themselves as Frente Negra Brasileira, who are a group of intellectuals and artists who are trying to basically create the basis for, if now there's still a lack of material, if it weren't for them, like, I mean, it would be even more complicated to research and to find ways to reorganize the archive. And so her practice basically to go back to the past and try to reorganize this discontinuity. I guess that maybe now you can go ahead. Ju, você pode continuar pouquinho. Let's just go. Vamos parte por parte.
Tá bom. Então, quando eu penso na palavra imaginação nesse contexto, a gente pode voltar na história e pensar que, em 1931, a Frente Negra Brasileira estava questionando o sistema educacional brasileiro e reivindicando, por exemplo, que no dia 20 de novembro a gente pudesse considerar um dia que fosse comemorar a luta de Zumbi dos Palmares. Ou seja, isso foi imaginado, e hoje isso é fato na nossa realidade.
And so one of the tools that she used for both her research and for her artistic practice is imagination, like, I mean, like any speculative modes of thinking. She again goes back to Frente Negra Brasileira, as I mentioned, this collective of Black intellectuals and artists who imagine what if we could establish a date to celebrate Black African Brazilian history, you know, and this date back then they chose a date that now we celebrate. And so basically it's kind of like if 70 years ago, well, more than 70, sorry, but in the 30s, when Frente Negra Brasileira imagined that we need at least to start to understand who are the heroes and when to celebrate those heroes. And then basically they go back to the image of Zumbi dos Palmares, who used to be he was basically a Black man who was enslaved and who struggled against the slave in the colonial times in Brazil. And the day that we consider now when he was his birthday, or when it's considered like one of the most important dates for Black history in Brazil. But back in the 30s, it was just like a speculative gesture of Frente Negra Brasileira. And now it's still part of the law, you know, and so that gesture back then, who seemed something just pure speculation, now is part of how Brazilian history is organized. You know, November 20th is a day to celebrate this hero. And like, I mean, there are no even documents that can properly confirm the existence of this person, but it's established there. And so this day is also a day to imagine other possibilities than the ones who were first offered to us.
Posso só concluir, Ti?
Sim, and just to conclude.
Então, isso é só um exemplo para a gente pensar coisas muito maiores, né? Então, se hoje nós temos uma lei, que é um marco legal, em que institui a obrigatoriedade de ensino de arte, cultura e história afro-brasileira, africana e indígena em todas as escolas do país, isso é uma conquista muito importante que tem a ver com esses processos de imaginação, né? Se hoje a gente tem uma universidade pública, né, pós-graduação, cada vez mais com a presença de pessoas negras, a presença de intelectuais negros, artistas negros nos acervos dos museus, enfim, uma mudança muito significativa da presença negra nesses campos da arte e da educação, é porque isso foi imaginado. Então, é nesse sentido que eu elaboro a imaginação no meu processo criativo e também na minha prática como educadora.
And Juliana closes her answer saying that the power of imagination as a tool to reorganize the present and the future. And so if today we celebrate, or we are at least aware of, I mean, first of all, there's like, I mean, as Anika was saying a few minutes ago, now we have this law that demands that art history, that Black art history or indigenous art history is part of the official curriculum in Brazil. And what Juliana argues is that if now it's part of the establishment, there was a moment when a group of people, a group of Black intellectuals had to imagine and wonder, what if we had this possibility? And that's the power of imagination that's used both as a research, but also as a tool for her artistic practice, as I mentioned before.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you, Tiago. I will try to connect this historical part with the present and your artistic work. There's a thread running through this publication, actually, and it's blue in color, blue thread. And this thread is inspired by your work, Juliana, as it is depicted also on the cover. It's one of your artworks. And the color blue here represents somehow the imaginative part you mentioned. And maybe you can just explain a little bit the role of the color blue in your artistic work.
Bom, a cor azul no meu trabalho tem sido uma metáfora para pensar processos de partilha do sensível, né? Então, eu começo a trazer o azul na minha pesquisa muito numa tentativa de começar a questionar os limites da representação no meu próprio trabalho, né? Quer traduzir, Ti?
So Juliana used the color, like the blue, as a metaphor to help her to understand the limits of visibility. And so blue as an abstraction, blue as an aesthetic experiment, as a tool to not only to criticize visibility per se, but also to, again, going back to imagination as a gesture and as a tool of research, blue as a metaphor to question the limits of visibility.
Então, quando eu escolho fazer essas pinturas com pétalas de flor, essa é uma flor de origem indonesiana, ela se chama Clitoria ternata. Eu começo a trabalhar com essa flor muito pelo interesse de olhar para a cor como um lugar de experiência sensível, no campo da percepção visual, né? Então, para mim, me interessaria entender o que seria a cor azul como um lugar de experiência, como um lugar de uma dimensão, por exemplo, do paladar, né? Como que seria comer o azul, como que seria beber o azul. E aí eu começo a fazer performances em que eu convido as pessoas para que queiram falar um pouco sobre o azul e que queiram experimentar o azul. E aí, a partir dessas performances que eu fui realizando, eu percebi que essa experiência de performance abria um espaço de trocas de memórias e relatos azuis. E aí eu abri um campo de encontro muito interessante para além dessa condição da minha experiência enquanto uma mulher negra, mas pensando em outras possibilidades, né? Então foi quando eu comecei a me perguntar, né? Posso eu, enquanto artista negra, abstrair? Posso eu falar do azul? E daí essas experiências com pintura, com essa flor, têm sido muito importante nessa pesquisa, nesse processo também de imaginar outras formas de me colocar no mundo enquanto artista.
So, Juliana, this blue color that Juliana works now, and that is also in the cover of the book, comes from her experiments with a flower, with a plant called Clitora ternatia, who is that is a flower where she extracts this raw material, and after few days and few weeks, she finds the proper tone that she's interested in working with. And this flower is not only a material, or is not only a raw material where she wants to find the perfect blue. It's also a way to experiment the color as an experience. And so it's also possible to drink the tea from this flower. And so it's a blue tea, by the way. And so it's also kind of like wondering what are the possibilities of understanding color, understanding the blue color as an experience. What are the possibilities of drinking blue, eating blue? And so she has been organizing sessions, like performance also, where she invites people to drink this tea, and from this moment of sharing the tea and eating these leaves of the flowers, she creates this sort of like sociability space, or space of sociability, where people also, people who join this performance can also wonder what are the possibilities of abstraction, how, or basically, and now also inserting a word by myself, how abstraction can help us to escape from a regime of visibility that can be a trap.
I have one last question, which I would like to direct to Thiago, and I would like to ask you to answer a little bit shorter, because time is running short. In Brazil, we have a very delicate situation right now. A diverse anti-racist education is sincerely threatened by the current political government. And I would like just to ask you, how do or can critical artists and educators engage in this specific moment? Where do you see possible fields of insertion of critical education approaches, like the one we were talking about?
Okay, thank you. I'll be very short. I guess, of course, what is happening in Brazil in the past year is scary, and it's beyond the possibilities. I mean, I can't have no words, basically, but it also tells a lot about the ghosts or things that we haven't found a solution, we haven't really fixed from our history, recent history, and also from colonial times. I guess it's just basically, it's almost like a cliche to say that ghosts comes to haunt you. And I guess basically that's what is going on now. I mean, we never really went through with the energy that it was necessary through the whole problems that basically forms this territory that we ended up calling Brazil. And basically, I guess Juliana it's an interesting example, people are still producing, people have been of course, things are more difficult now, especially with like in the I would say that from the 2000s, early 2000s until 2014, there was a very interesting moment in the country where a left-wing government was supporting artists' practice, was supporting this possibilities of rewriting or reorganizing history. Now there's a backlash. And so it's an interesting moment to understand how can we organize again, and remembering that other artists, other thinkers, other scholars have faced difficult moments before, and so in a way, these moments might always come back. And so I guess like this exercise of looking back to experience from the past and how they manage to survive and to reorganize themselves is, I believe, is what those artists here are trying to do as well, again.
Thank you so much, Thiago and Juliana. I would like to continue this discussion. Maybe we have a chat later on. And I would now hand over to Miriam and Aram Ziai.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Can everybody in Berlin hear me as well? So, yes? Okay. Thank you. Aram, you and Elina Mama have conducted a systematic study on racism in the teaching of the development in German secondary school textbooks. We have some of the results also in this book. You cannot see well with my virtual background, but what were your main results in the study?
Yes, thanks for the invitation. I'm honored to be part of this book project. Our main results were that, to an extent that we had not suspected, Eurocentric patterns and images, and even racist patterns and images occur. So
were they visible in images and the text, and it was repeated in several books from different editing houses, right? What you found out?
Well, one has to differentiate, of course. There are worse cases and cases of textbooks where the authors seemingly strive for a more progressive attitude. But even then, it feels that they are stuck with some images and some binaries which are hard to overcome. One example is one thing we discovered actually in different textbooks, the same visualization of an African girl and a German girl, and sometimes she was referred to as an Ethiopian girl and her name was Eden. And the German girl was named either Julia or Marie. And basically their CV, their life was depicted in some brief remarks. And Eden's life was basically characterized by no education, early marriage, and basically an early death from AIDS after having had 7 children or something. Whereas Julia knew about birth control and had a wonderful education and went to lead a normal life. And this was basically the epitome of the poor, ignorant African girl which needs to be saved. This was the message that the textbooks gave.
So they were contrasting the worst case of in Africa you might find, and the best case of a or considered normal you find in Europe. And and that's a pattern of comparison that should be obviously added with some other criteria, right? And this was lacking in the books, I guess.
Yes, I mean, what you had were the usual stereotypes. So basically, you did not see pictures of modern African cities. You saw some images of shanty towns, maybe. You did not see poverty in the north. You saw only the well-off middle class in the north, maybe, if there were pictures. So and this is where only a certain part of reality is being depicted, which reproduces the stereotypes of one part of the world which has problems, and another part of the world where everything's fine, where everybody's well off, where no one is starving, where no one is homeless, and which possesses the knowledge to basically civilize or develop the rest of the world.
Yes, you gave an example of this, teach a man how to fish, right? Maybe you can go deeper on that, because it's often something you hear in these contexts.
Yeah, which is appalling. I mean, it just suggests that unless someone from Europe teaches people in the South to fish, they are unable to feed themselves, which is so absurd that it is just beyond imagination. I mean, the whole history, the whole bloody history of colonialism is being sidelined, and it is being assumed that well, African livelihoods, or basically livelihoods in the colonies, have been destroyed by the colonizers and the advent of capitalism and the enclosure of the commons. Instead, it is actually suggested that, well, these people are ignorant and are not able to lead their lives by themselves. So Western experts, Western Development Corporation, Western knowledge, Western technology is crucial for the improvement of their livelihoods.
So how were the key concepts such as development and development assistance represented in these books and in these material? And what can be the trap of such a representation? You already started to mention it, but can you precise that on a bit more?
So basically, if we're talking about development is sort of a particular pattern of looking at global inequality. And this pattern assumes that there are certain units, countries usually, and some of them are more developed, some of them are less developed, but all can be situated on a universal scale of development. So basically, global inequality is imagined as being backward on this ladder of progress or whatever, which is problematic basically for a number of reasons. But the two main critiques are, first of all, even if we accept the ladder, the universal scale, the unit of analysis, one country, basically neglects the international relations. So being part of an international system, a world capitalist system, a world colonialist system, has been a major factor for determining whether one country is on the top or on the bottom of this ladder. And this is not being taken into consideration, not at all. And the other factor is, and the other critique is, that if development is something positive, and if development denotes a good society, then it is actually difficult to generalize in the form of objective standards, as if all people were convinced, okay, this is what a good society looks like. Then actually the state of a good society is, from a different perspective, a matter of democratic debate, a matter of deliberation, maybe a matter of cultural values as well. And this is being completely sidelined in a pattern which assumes that our own European society is the ideal society. And the difference is then depicted merely in terms of backwardness. If other societies are different, they are less developed, they are less, in former times they were seen as less civilized. And this has changed in the course of the 20th century, so that basically the mission of civilizing the uncivilized tribes has given way to the idea of developing the underdeveloped regions. But the pattern is still the same. The ideal norm and everything which deviates is seen as deficient. And as I said, the knowledge of how to improve these societies is then located again here in the West.
And are there any any sources where the pupils who read these textbooks start also to ask maybe if there are any economic interests behind development cooperation, or if these transnational companies who are also active in the sector, if they have personal motives, or is or always this idea of helping in the and emphasized?
Well, here again, the different perspectives of the textbooks did play a role. So there were, in fact, one or two textbooks which were also giving information about Western fishing corporations basically destroying the livelihood of West African fishermen. So elements like these could be found in a few textbooks, but in the majority, the poverty of the Global South was basically explained in very simplistic terms: lack of the usual lack of technology, lack of knowledge, lack of capital, and in the end, often even population growth was cited as a major cause of poverty in the South, which basically means...
Can you go more into this demographic question, how population growth was represented in that?
Yeah, so population growth was seen as basically the poor. It's the fault of the poor themselves that they are poor, because they are reproducing so quickly that there's not enough food, there's not enough energy, there's not enough resources. And which is, of course, bogus, because every child that is born in North America or in Europe consumes 5 times, 10 times, 15 times, 20 times as much energy and resources. So that a situation of scarcity on a global scale, if there is one, it would be caused by white children, not by POC children. But this is, well, this is not being discussed in the depictions and in the images. And one very memorable image, which was the extreme case, but it also occurred in one of these textbooks. There was an image where basically there was a buggy from which babies were swarming out, and there was one white person with an apron on which there was written World Food Aid, trying to feed these babies, but it was just too many babies and he just couldn't do it. And if you had a look at this picture, the babies formed, in fact, a nuclear mushroom cloud. So this is actually a modern depiction of the image of the population explosion, or the population bomb, which has been around since 1960s, which in fact dehumanizes non-Western babies as something which threatens the survival of humanity. And even although the benevolent North tries to feed them, which is a lie, there's just too many of them, which gives the implicit message. So we have to take care that fewer babies are being born in the Global South. And this is, well, this is racist. So.
Yeah, in fact, this is bluntly racist. Even maybe the intention was not conscious to the persons who edited these books, but what would you recommend now and in the future for the authors and editors of such textbooks? What could they ask themselves before they publish something like this, which is multiplying racist ideas sometimes, or short-sighted ideas on world relations? What would be your recommendation?
I mean, there have been some very valuable recommendations of the Rassismuskritischer Leitfaden, so the anti-racist guide for teaching materials, but also in numerous other publications. And it would be very important to, first of all, raise awareness that there is a perspective, that basically these narratives that are currently used and seen as universal are in fact very Eurocentric and often even racist narratives. So whose perspectives are represented in the textbooks and whose are not? Which experts are being cited, which are not? Are anti-colonial struggles being depicted from the perspective of the colonizers or from the perspective of those trying to liberate themselves of colonialism? Is Césaire and Fanon being cited, or is it just the usual white scholars and white learned men which are used as a reference? So this would be a starting ground for confronting the problematic that we have, and to then start talking about racist stereotypes as well.
So thank you very much. I have some more questions and more. I would like to continue this discussion, but I think we're really after time already. Okay. So I would like to thank you a lot for your impulse, how to foster critical thinking among editors and teachers and pupils. And I think it's an invitation for all of us to learn more and to transport more the ability to think beyond the current situation and to question power structures and privileges. Thank you a lot.
Thanks a lot.
So I give back to the studio.
Thank you, Miriam and Aram. We are already coming to the point of wrapping up. And yes, the completion of this book marks the end of a process that has lasted over 2 years now. And we hope that at the same time, it will inspire you and us to continue further conversations. We started some today. We have many more in the book. And questions in our post-colonial moment. To continue to come to the title of the book again, to untie, to tie.
We would like to express our gratitude to our guests. And also to the contributors of the book. It's a performance, right? Now you know. So, so the contributors of the book as well, and also Eve, thank you so much for your work. Robert, also for your work. Yeah. Eva, yes. Thank you so much. And also the whole team of BBP, the whole team of IFA Gallery Berlin. And thank you so much, dear audience, here in this space and behind the screens. Thank you for listening.
Week, and don't forget to tell your friends and to share it on your networks. So thank you also from my side. So, goodbye.
Bye. Wir werden jetzt den Livestream cutten.